Hello and welcome to Public Sector Data Protection in 2023, What You Need to Know. Today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage you to ask any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. And I should say, our speaker today is fast on his feet, so if a question comes in that's right on point, I might break in and ask that question to him right there. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a few valuable resources from Veeam. There's a link to get started with Veeam, but there's also a link to the 2023 Data Protection Trends Executive Brief, which has context and detail around a lot of the great data that our speaker from Veeam is going to share here today. The slide deck from today is also packed with charts and data from research, and you can get that slide deck in your handouts too. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section as well. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenter, and to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. After the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. So with all that, let's get to today's fantastic content. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, to welcome back our speaker today, Jeff Reichert, who's VP of Solution Strategy at Veeam. Jeff, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm excited to have a chance to talk with everyone who's joined for our session today about some very new research that we have about data protection trends. So why don't we go ahead and jump in? I work on the product strategy team at Veeam Software. We are an enterprise data management, data protection software company. And we do a ton of research, actually not just one, but 4 and sometimes 5 large-scale studies a year to find out what's happening around data protection in various areas. Our biggest survey, sort of the flagship survey, is our Data Protection Trends Report that came out beginning of the year in January. This year, we surveyed 4,200 unbiased IT decision makers and administrators. These were in organizations all over the world, and they did not know that it was Veeam who was offering the survey. This was not just Veeam customers, it was unbiased people. They didn't know they were talking to Veeam. They were asked by a professional survey company their answers around questions to do with what's happening to their data and how they're protecting it. Relevant for today's event is that because we survey so many people, 4,200, we have a statistically significant sample, not just for organizations as a whole, but for different types of organizations. And so today what we're going to be looking at are some specific ways that public sector, that is state and local and federal level government, and education are similar to the larger pool of respondents in terms of what's going on with data protection and how they're different. We have a selfish reason for doing this research at Veeam. We really want to know what organizations that might be our customers or become our customers are running into around challenges and what they want, and we use that to inform our product directions. But we also aim to give back to the community by doing this. I've had many conversations with backup administrators, with IT directors who know what their organization needs to do, the direction maybe that it should be going on technology choices, but they haven't perhaps been able to convince executive or financial or elected leadership that that is the direction that needs to be taken. And so with luck, what you'll hear today will arm you for maybe budget discussions or technology directions discussions that you want to be having. And if it succeeds in doing that, then we'll have accomplished a big part of what we aim to do when we commission this kind of research. So let's jump in. The first thing that we ask year by year is, okay, we're talking about data protection trends, but what does that mean? Where does your organization actually have infrastructure? And you'll notice this year, since we've asked it 3 years in a row, the oldest data goes back to 2020, which is to say, right when COVID kicked off. You'll notice that the physical servers in the data center over on the left took a huge drop when COVID kicked off. From 2020 to 2021, which is the second bar from the left, they went from 38% to 29%. We had a correspondingly similar drop in VMs in the data center. If you look at the middle group, we went from 30% to 23% generally. And generally speaking, physical and virtual servers, both now, which is that super bright green bar, third from the right, and projected out for the next couple of years, are steady at about 1/4 of organizations' workloads. And cloud-based workloads are steady at roughly 50% of organizations' workloads. And you'll notice that things hosted either in service providers or in the hyperscale public cloud also showed a giant increase when COVID came up, right? It went up from 32 to 47%. That's where it is today, and it's only going to be increasing. This is an interesting stat to look at when we look at public sector, because there's still, I think, kind of a widely spread belief that public sector may be lagging behind other kinds of organizations when it comes to cloud adoption or technology adoption. And that's absolutely not the case. If we look at the combined stats for state and local and federal level government, and again, these are international, this is not US only or North America only, these are the global stats for different levels of government, you'll notice that they map actually very closely to the larger pool. They're within the margin for error. So there's not really any significant difference between the roughly 50% cloud adoption that we see with government agencies and roughly 1/4 of workloads running on physical or virtual servers. The same is pretty much true when it comes to educational organizations. And again, by education, we mean both primary, K through 12 type education, younger kids, as well as college and graduate school. So this extends the gamut from university type education all the way down to school level. But it's interesting because there's often a lot of overlap in the challenges that all kinds of educational organizations have. Things like remote learning, which are of course mirrored in government by things like remote citizen services and remote work. So just to lay the groundwork, this is where data lives, and this is the areas that we're going to talk about protecting. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes, because that increase in cloud adoption that we've seen, especially in the past 3 years, is going to be significant when we talk about causes of outages and where folks are protecting data. So every year we also ask the same question around how well organizations think they're doing protecting their data. This is kind of an eye chart, but the top question basically asks, are you able to get back up and running to recover as quickly as you would like to if you have an outage? And you'll see 79% of organizations say, no, we can't get back up and running as quickly as we'd like to. Or, I'm sorry, 82% of organizations say we can't get back up and running as quickly as we'd like to with the current tools that we have. And that's the top set of bars. Either 40% and 42% strongly agree that they'd be down longer than they wanted to be down. 79%, so 35 plus 44, agree or strongly agree that we're not protecting our data as often as the business or the mission would like us to, that we would in fact lose more data than maybe executive leadership, financial leadership, elected leadership would like us to lose if something did go wrong, right? This is pretty classic. We all get very accustomed to services always being on. And so maybe when your leadership finds out that we're still using only daily backups to protect something that they view as mission critical, and they feel we couldn't lose more than 3 or 4 hours of data or have more than 3 or 4 hours of downtime, it's very significant for them. If we compare these with uh, government, and this is the first time that we'll see a chart like that, but you'll see it again and again where we break out state and local government, federal government, and educational organizations, you'll notice honestly that there's very, very little difference from the broader pool. State and local matches exactly the 82% of the larger pool. Fed is doing a little bit better. And especially in terms of how often data is protected, Fed is pretty significantly better, 12 points better than the 79% average. So the conclusion that we at Veeam have drawn from this is that on the government side, the last couple of years with the increasing reliance on digital technology to provide remote citizen services and remote work, we have seen some maturing of the way that that data is being protected when it's moved to new IT estates to provide new services. A lot of that has probably been hastened by things like Executive Order 14028 around zero trust, which had some big ramifications for how organizations protect their data. We'll talk more about that shortly. But we've also probably seen some ramifications for local government and for educational organizations that are beginning to be seen because of all the COVID stimulus response, which typically had a very big digital component. And we saw a lot of governments and educational organizations taking advantage of that. So if we move on and look at the next topic, okay, this is where our data lives. This is we're still not super happy with how we're protecting it, but let's talk about what's actually causing outages. Now, I know that the bar chart on the left is a little bit of an eye chart, but I will explain it to you. We've asked about the same causes of outages for the last several years in the survey. And so every year we ask two questions about what caused downtime. The first question, which is the long bar on the top, is a popularity contest. You can choose anything you want in there so that you'll notice it doesn't add up to 100% because people can choose more than one, whichever ones they like. But the lower bars are what was the most significant outage, not all causes, but what was the most impactful outage that you had. What's interesting is that for the last 2 years, government and education organizations have all said that cybersecurity events were the most impactful. And in fact, for federal governments last year, they were also the most common cause of outages. This year, all organizations catch up to that. You'll notice that top bar, cybersecurity event, it is tied for first in terms of the most common cause of outage at 53%, but it is also in the lead in terms of being the most impactful cause of outages. What's interesting in this year's statistics, if we look at the top 5 most impactful causes for outages and how they're stack ranked for state and local, for federal, and for education organizations, that's changed a little bit. We have the top cause for state and local being infrastructure networking outages, which was second in terms of most impactful for the bigger pool, and that is still in the top 5 for federal. And then we have other causes, including cybersecurity events, which are in the top 5 for all 3 groups that I've broken out here, both for federal, for state and local, and for educational organizations. But I've also included, if we fill this in, look at the top 5, other human-caused courses of data loss or downtime, right? The most impactful. And that can stand from accidental deletion or accidental misconfiguration to intentional disruption, intentional deletion of data. You'll notice for our schools, cybersecurity events, intentional disruption by a disgruntled employee, and accidental deletion, so unintentional disruption by an employee, are 3 of the top 5 most impactful causes of outages. And so what we have seen correspondingly is a big focus on tamper-proof backups to protect against people accidentally or intentionally deleting data, whether they're insiders at our organization or whether they're adversaries who have broken onto our network. If we round out the most impactful causes of outages, the same things are still causing us downtime now that have in the past, things like our applications, our servers, our operating systems going down, just like the infrastructure and networking outage that was the #1 cause of impactful outages for state and local government. But let's think back to that slide that we looked at a minute ago, where we look at where our IT estates are actually running now, and the fact that 50%, and this is true basically for every kind of organization worldwide, including education, federal and state and local government, are sitting in the cloud. If we look at the most impactful causes of outages for educational organizations, cloud was in the lead, not networking, not cybersecurity events, but an outage of cloud resources. And I don't think that will be a surprise to most of the folks in educational organizations that are watching today, because you know, if you're K through 12, how heavily you've gone into Google Workspaces for that environment, or other online tools all the way up through universities. And so those have a real tangible effect when they go down. And of course, it's also quite relevant when we think in this case about where we need to be protecting data and what we should be doing around protecting data. So we've established that we've got an IT estate that is 50-50 on-prem between physical and virtual, but 50% in the cloud, that most organizations are still not happy with how much downtime they would have and how often they're protecting their data, and that we have various human and unhuman caused sources of significant outages for all kinds of government and for educational organizations, and that cloud is a big part of it. Given that dissatisfaction, given the fact that we moved our IT estates to new areas, you might think that most organizations are planning on changing or spending more on their backup solution in the coming year, and you'd be exactly right. What we found worldwide is that data protection budgets are going to be increasing 6.5% globally. Educational organizations pretty directly mirror that. The news is not quite so rosy when it comes to state and local and federal government. Those organizations are going to be increasing their backup, their data protection budgets a little bit, but it is actually going to lag the general IT spending growth that analyst firms like Gartner and IDC expect, which are at 4 and 5% respectively. So again, speculating, but that may be because our federal and state and local level respondents have already made some significant changes in how they protect their data as they've moved their IT estates up into the cloud over the past couple of years. But for education, again, maybe this is a knock-on effect from the stimulus grants that we've seen here in the United States, but you can expect to see robust increases in your data protection budgets that are right in line with the responses that we got from the global community around that. Okay, so the next question that we ask every year is, okay, you've got budget for data protection and things aren't going great. If you were going to change, what would cause you to change your primary data protection solution? I mentioned a minute ago that you'll get used to seeing these bar graphs with a couple of different bars. This is exactly the same as the other one. The long bar is the if you could choose everything that you might select to change. You know, yes, we want to improve reliability. We want to move to the cloud. We want to move from the cloud. We want better recovery point, recovery time objective. We want to reduce cost, et cetera, et cetera. You can see all the different choices that are listed here. And then we gave you only one choice. If there was only one, and this was the primary reason that you'd want to change. And you'll notice for the larger pool of respondents, it's not even close. It's improving reliability. That is that 12%, that bottom bar in the top line. And that ties in directly with the broad dissatisfaction that most folks have with how long they'd be down if they had a failure. You know, 82% saying we'd be down longer than we want to be, and 79% saying we'd lose more data than we wanted to lose. If we look at state and local and federal and education organizations, it is right up there in the top 5. And for education, it is number 1, just like for the larger pool, it's number 1. Backups, data protection remain, generally speaking, broken, and organizations have budget to change, are looking to change, and what they want is for solutions that work better. If we round out the stack ranking for the top 5, you'll notice that cloud figures heavily into those. Backing up to the cloud is first for state and local in terms of change driver, second for Fed. Interestingly, education has perhaps moved earlier than some of the other types of organizations with getting data to the cloud, but for them in the top 5 was the exact opposite, getting data back on-prem. I suspect that part of the reason for that is that a lot of the resources that our educational organizations are using, like we saw before, are based in the cloud, and organizations have been affected by ransomware attacks or outages for that kind of resources. And many education customers that I speak to have learned maybe the hard way that they need to keep custody of their data, maybe on-prem or cross-cloud, to guard against that kind of outage. Let's go ahead and fill out. The second broad area that I'm filling in here with these builds is just functionality. You'll notice that all three types of organizations wanted to include more frequent data protection. Again, pretty widely spread that organizations feel they aren't protecting their data often enough. So that's where snapshots and replication fit in. And then data reuse for federal customers is just another increased functionality type use case. So that's why I put it in there. If we fill that out, we have a pretty broad desire to either increase the number of tools that we're using or decrease them. Sometimes, as in the case for state and local, we have both those answers. And I have to think that what state and local governments mean when they say reduce complexity but diversify the tool set is that they want tools that are very granular and specific and capable for their different workloads, but they don't want that to increase their management headaches because they've got enough consoles to be looking at now. Now, I saved an interesting answer for last, and that is number 3 for education. You'll notice that for state and local and for federal government and for education, only once did reducing cost fit in to the top 5 drivers for change. We noticed that very much at Veeam, and the conclusion that we draw from that, even for organizations like state and local government and for educational organizations, which are famously focused on budget, resource constrained. I don't think that I ever have a conversation with a local government, a local sheriff's department, police department, or school system where budget does not factor into the conversation. But budget factors in only if you can do what you need to do, only if you can accomplish the mission that you're aiming to set out to do. Yes, it was in the top 5 for education, but it didn't even make it into the top 5 for government. And you'll notice that the reduction of cost, improving ROI or total cost of ownership, or straight up changing from OpEx to CapEx model are not near the top of priorities for the broader response pool. Those 3 are down near the bottom. And so what's important is to protect data and to do a better job. And if we can save costs while we're doing it, that's great. But cost is not clearly the main driver that organizations are looking at when they contemplate a change. And just to sum that up, and the reason that I left this slide in here summarizing this is that, again, we hope that the PDF version of this presentation will be useful for you when you're having capability conversations about your data protection solution or maybe budget conversations. And so we want to make sure if you're saying, look, we might need to spend a little bit more, look, we might need to absorb the cost of changing solutions, you're not alone in making that judgment. What really matters is getting the flexibility to keep data where you need it, in the cloud, out of the cloud, cross-cloud, and having a solution that's reliable so that you know you're protected. Now, when we have data protection conversations with government or with school systems or universities, there's probably not a one of those I've had in the last year that is not included at some level the main data protection disaster that a lot of organizations face these days, which is ransomware. You'll notice I said at the top of the presentation that we interviewed 4,200 folks worldwide for this survey. The N listed for this statistic, the number of respondents, is just under half that at 1,932. And that's because we had 1,932 respondents admit that they had had a ransomware attack in their organization and that they had the ability to answer a question about how many they got. Personally, and if you attend analyst conversations about this subject at all, you'll probably hear this from other analysts as well. We suspect that the percentage is higher. Our own data shows that it is higher than just half. In fact, what we had amongst those who did know the answer to the question was that 85% had had one or more ransomware attacks during the previous year. And in fact, the global average is 2.x, a little bit more than 2 ransomware attacks per year. And that is identical for state and local government, for federal government, and for educational organizations. Of course, we have a very unhappy 6% of respondents who had had 5 or more ransomware attacks, in the past year that had attacked their data. We then go on in the statistics to say, okay, you got hit by a ransomware attack. How did it go? What happened? And when we ask that question, and this directly feeds, of course, into what folks are looking for in their backup solutions, we had about 1,600 respondents who were able to answer, okay, give us an idea about how much of your data was affected. And you'll notice it's a pie chart. We had a very, very unfortunate 7% that had more than 80% of their data encrypted, right? That's that bright red nightmare bar up at the top. And then we had an unfortunate 19% that had, between 60 and 80% of their data selected, and it goes around the bar. But on average, globally, about 4 terabytes in 10, about 40% of data was encrypted in a ransomware attack. That is not a statistic that any for-profit organization wants to take to their board. That is not a statistic that anyone working in government wants to take to their elected or appointed leadership, or that anyone working in education wants to take to their school or university leadership. The second question that we ask around ransomware is, okay, the worst happened. On average, 40% of your data got encrypted. Then what? How much of that data were you able to get back when you tried to recover? And the answer is, again, we had the very, very lucky 20% that were able to get back more than 80% of their data from their backups. We had a very unlucky 16% who lost almost everything. But on average, organizations were able to get back 55% of the encrypted data, which is why this slide says that it's basically a coin toss. It's 50-50. If you get data that's encrypted, there's a 50% chance you'll be able to recover it. There's a 50% chance you won't be able to recover it. One of the interesting things that a sister survey that we do, which is our ransomware trends research, and by the way, this year's ransomware trends research survey will be released in just over a week at our annual Veeam On conference, which is taking place. It's beginning Monday after next here in May. And so you'll be able to see this year's most current research with 1,200 respondents that all suffered a ransomware attack. But when we ask about if you paid the ransom of organizations that got hit by ransomware, paying a ransom does not significantly affect the speed of recovery or the amount that's recovered. In fact, every year there's a proportion of organizations that get hit by ransomware attacks who are not even given the option to pay a ransom. What they've been hit with is wiper malware, and the ransomware criminals that hit them were either too incompetent or too vindictive. Basically, they were just committing an arson attack. They weren't even trying to make money to be able to get a ransom out of the organization. The most significant of those attacks where it wasn't even possible to recover by paying a ransom was, of course, not Petya, which was just about exactly 6 years ago. And for those of you that remember NotPetya, that was an attack that was launched by a Russian military intelligence component against a popular accounting software that was in use in Ukraine, that was done just to harass Ukraine, and it sort of slipped its borders and spread worldwide and affected pharmaceutical companies and shipping companies and did over $10 billion worth of damage worldwide. That obviously is very relevant for our current geopolitical climate. And so you've been seeing a steady drumbeat of alerts from governments all over the world saying, look, if you don't have resilient backups, you really need to get them. If we look at these two statistics and we look at government, the good news is that public sector was much better on average in terms of the amount of data affected, 10% less than the larger pool at 29%, and state and local was even better. State and local lost only 26% of data in attacks. Government was also, generally speaking, much more able to recover when they were hit with ransomware attacks. Fully, 9 points better on average, with Fed at 68% recoverable, being 13 points better than the average. So good news from government. The investments that we've made in resilient data protection have really been paying off. Slightly less good news if we build this out on the education side. Again, the general pool, 39% of data affected. Unfortunately, education customers tended to lose more data than average, and they were able to recover just about exactly as much as the average. 56 versus 55 is within the margin of error. So the news may be a little bit less good for education. We all know that's been a very hard hit sector. And so we can probably expect to see more investments by education customers in making their backups more resilient to ransomware. And if you're an educational organization that's looking to do that, I hope these stats are useful for you. So that's what's causing outages, and it's a lot of things, but obviously cybersecurity events are top of mind for a lot of organizations. When we ask organizations what you're looking for, what are the top things that you want from the solution that you're going to move to an updated data protection solution, you'll notice the top two are integrating data protection with our cybersecurity strategy more generally and automating it. We lump those two together because increasingly organizations are automating their cyber recovery strategy. They are being forced to automate their data management and disaster recovery strategies by regulators or by their cyber insurance company. And so, of course, they're expecting that to be components of the new solution that they're going to roll out. It is probably not a surprise based on what we just saw that state and local, federal, and educational organizations are right there with that focus on cyber integration, right? It is exactly like the larger pool, the top answer of what organizations are looking for from a modern solution by our government respondents, and it's number 2 stack ranked by educational organizations. If we round it out a little bit, or automation and orchestration also fit right neatly in with the top priorities of these 3 types of organizations. And after that, of course, we have cloud, filling in the ability to go to the cloud, the ability to go from the cloud, the ability to get data down from the cloud, are all parts of what folks are looking for from a modern solution. And again, we noticed in an earlier slide that the ability to move backups back from the cloud was important for education organizations. And a big part of that is that some have been burned by workloads, by losing data or by having workloads become unavailable that they've migrated up to the cloud. The other are just different types of functionality, whether being able to use backup data for secondary use cases like digital forensics or patch testing, or finding out where I have confidential data that maybe I didn't know I had it, or being able to automate disaster recovery as a service. Those fill out the top 5 in the stack ranking for these types of orgs. And if I fill that in, again, with a neat summary slide, what we see, and there's links to more information about how Veeam can help in these in the QR codes on the left, is that the top, if we had to sum it up, the top priorities are make backup part of your cyber strategy, be able to do management in an integrated way with all my other systems of business continuity and DR, and I've got to have cloud in the mix in terms of capabilities. If you are familiar with Veeam, I'll just share a little bit with you about where Veeam is now in terms of what we offer around data protection. Many of you that know Veeam or have known us for a long time have known us because we lead in the data protection front and the backup front. We still protect backups for virtual machines. That's an area that we've led for quite a while. But if you take a look at what the platform focuses on now, you'll notice that it is not just, for example, VMware, which we've been the leader in backing up for the last 15 years, but it also includes all of the leading native on-prem hypervisors, as well as things like software as a service, so things like Microsoft 365, which is very relevant for data protection, disaster recovery conversations, and solutions like Salesforce, which is becoming increasingly important for all levels of government, both federal and state and local, for things like managing cases for medical systems, large medical systems, including federal ones for veterans, as well as managing citizen services for all kinds of citizen services. We see a lot more uptake in Salesforce protection. And of course, you need to protect that data. You need the ability to get it out of Salesforce just so that you can keep custody of it. We also have cloud native protection for all of the leading hypervisors, the hyperscale cloud providers, whether it is AWS, whether it's Azure, Google, or if you have deployed on-prem or cloud-based cloud native applications using Kubernetes. And that is something that we increasingly see being adopted, especially in federal government, but also in state and local government. There's an uptick in containerized Kubernetes applications. When we talk about the Veeam platform in terms of capabilities, obviously the base thing that you want from a data management platform is secure backup and fast recovery. That is more relevant than it has ever been before, because we are now typically being asked to do recoveries that don't look like the recoveries that we used to have to do. It used to be a data set, maybe a database or individual users' files, or worst case, a server, or maybe a rack of servers or an application went down. The new reality is that we have to plan for disaster recovery of our entire data center, probably to a different location, while an adversary is actively trying to thwart what we're doing. And that's why that secure backup and fast recovery is so relevant now. It's not just backup and recovery, but it's backups that are safe, and it's recovery that is fast, even for very large data sets. Those are also what drive the two upper levels of the platform, which is to say monitoring and analytics, so I can detect when I have a problem, and then the ability to orchestrate my recovery, because it's going to be bigger and it's going to be in more difficult circumstances than the recoveries that I used to have to manage. When we roll this up and talk in a general way to leaders in organizations that we're serving about what Veeam offers them, we tend to boil it down to three types of capabilities, and those are all designed to keep the business or the mission running. What we provide to organizations are data security, the knowledge that you can protect your data, even in a way that an adversary that's been active on your network for weeks can't delete. We provide data recovery, the ability to recover that not just to its original location or in its original format, but if you need to, up to the cloud or to a different data center. And that ties in with data freedom as well. Always having ownership of your data, always having custody of it, always being able to recover what you need, where you need it. If you'd like to know more about our research, and again, I mentioned that giving back to the larger community is a big motivation that we have for doing this research, there are 4 research studies that are currently out there now. I've been talking today about Data Protection Trends 2023. You'll notice that we have also released this year our Cloud Protection Trends research, which digs in a lot more into what organizations that have migrated workloads up into the cloud, whether infrastructure, platform, or software as a service, are doing to protect that data, what challenges they're running into, what solutions they're choosing. Of course, ransomware trends is another big one, and Salesforce trends. Ransomware trends, again, just to give a plug, we are going to release the 2023 version of this research where we talk to 200 more organizations, so 1,200 this year, not just 1,000. And that is going to be released at our annual Veeam On conference. I realize if you have not made plans to join us in Miami for this conference from May 22nd to May 25th, it's probably getting a little bit late to make those plans. But like most conferences that have taken place in the last few years, this will also be offered virtually. And it will be offered virtually both live and after the event on demand. So I would encourage you, you can register for the event either live or on demand, and it is free to register for it if you attend virtually. You can register using the QR code on this slide, and we really would like to see you there. I will make a shameless plug. I'm going to be having a great conversation, a great interview with the City of Calgary Police Department and a leading industry analyst while I'm there, talking about data protection challenges that law enforcement faces and how that maps to cloud challenges. I will also be having 2 great panels with other public sector leaders about, one is at the federal level with Harry Coker, formerly of the National Security Agency, about the latest information on cyber threats and the kind of responses that you'll be seeing in the next year plus from federal level law enforcement, federal level government. and another panel with local government talking about compliance challenges that they run into. So a lot of very relevant content if you're a Veeam user or if you're not a Veeam user that you can tune into at our Veeam On conference. And I hope you'll join us for it either in person or virtually, because I think it'll be valuable. We're expecting many thousands of folks, and there will be a lot of great content, including games and chances to win prizes. And I think that's where I hand things back over to you at this point, Scott, for any questions and for the wrap up here.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I just have to say, as somebody who's been to the Veeam event, VeeamON, I think the last time I went was maybe 2019, just before the pandemic. But I think it was
Yep.
still in Miami then, and it was a great show. I highly recommend it. So, Jeff, thanks for sharing this data. The effort that you guys put into high quality research is really amazing. It's always fascinating to see what you're finding from, both from the baseline questions to the new ones. And I love the way you guys oversample so you can do these statistically significant dives into different verticals and even subverticals. And I know you guys have your own reasons for doing this research, but it's a really valuable resource for the entire industry. Um, One thing that struck me in the data that you shared was how sticky that percentage of virtual machines running in hyperscalers since COVID has been. You see organizations starting to pull their employees back into the office full time, but it doesn't look like you're seeing much pressure in the data estate to do anything similar and get more assets under local control.
It's not the case. Absolutely. What we see is that it is very sticky. Most organizations, if you ask them to look in the crystal ball out 2 or 3 years, they think it's going to stay like it is. Some
Mm.
physical things, okay, the mainframes and big iron that's been running well on-prem is going to keep doing that.
Yeah,
VMs are here to stay. We see interesting cases of workload repatriation either for data sovereignty or cost reasons or performance reasons. But in most kinds of orgs, those are matched basically one for one with things moving up to the cloud for performance or scalability reasons or whatever. So data is still going both ways, workloads are still going both ways, but the percentages overall look like they're staying the same.
gotcha. Hey, there's a question here about ransomware. You hit some points on ransomware. They're wondering if you have more statistics on ransomware.
We have a lot more. I will quote some of the old ones because I can't talk about the 2023 research until we release it at VeeamON 2023. One of the reasons that we are seeing a lot of changes in the way that organizations protect their data is that basically it's sunk in. It's sunk in all the way up to the board level. And I know this is a cliche at this point, but it's a cliche because it's true. Most types of organizations are realizing on the ransomware front that it's not a matter of if they get hit, it's a matter of when they get hit. And statistically, and Veeam's research is right in line with that from Mandiant, Sophos, basically every organization that does big surveys on this. What our ransomware research showed last year is that if the adversary gets on your network, if you get hit, 96% of the time they're going to attack your backups. So it is not a matter of if, but when you're going to be compromised. And it's not a matter of if, but when they attack your backups when they get on your network. And that is driving a huge amount of different behavior. Folks who thought they were done with tapes forever, maybe tapes on the shelves are a good thing because I know an adversary on my network can't compromise those, or disk-based or cloud-based immutability solutions becoming really, really popular for that reason.
Okay, yeah. So those are some popular backup strategies that are being affected by ransomware. Okay,
Yep.
super. Um, So, a question from Lee it is wondering in cloud or hybrid architectures, does Veeam offer a different tenant space for government sector customers, or do they sort of mingle with private and public tenants?
No, great question. Because Veeam is not an as a service, we are not sending government data to our little enclave in Azure and AWS and wherever. What we do is support you to protect your data wherever you need to. And if that means that you're in GovCloud or Azure Government, and that's where you want to send your data, then you can absolutely do that using Veeam. We are not a service provider, we're a commercial off-the-shelf software provider. And so, yeah, absolutely. You can have your tenant up in Azure, in AWS, in Google Cloud, whatever the cloud is that you're using. and we support that. That extends, by the way, to supporting the government implementations of Microsoft 365. So if you have your data up there, our backup product for Microsoft 365 has supported that since day one, and you can absolutely protect GCC, GCC High, Microsoft 365 for government type data using Veeam Backup for 365 too.
Okay, great. Waverly has a question. They're just wondering about some of the features of the Veeam backups, just as far as security and things like that.
Sure. It is a huge focus. In fact, version 12 of the product came out in February of this year, February 14th, actually. And you could candidly say that it was basically a security release. Now I'm talking about Veeam Backup and Replication, the main product. We added multi-factor authentication for the last consoles in that product that didn't have it. We added yet more ways to achieve immutability in your backups, including for the first time the ability to send backup data directly to object storage with object lock enabled. Before you'd been able to do that, but it had to be the secondary landing zone of data, and we've added the ability to actually send your data right off the bat if you want to use Cloudian, if you want to use Scality, Minio, if you want to use Vast on-prem or any of the other on-prem object storage solutions, or of course, S3 compatible storage or Azure Blob storage up in the cloud. We support all of that. And all those have really, really good options for immutability. If you look at the at Veeam's partnership pages, it's called Object Ready or Veeam Ready program for storage. There's about 36 different on-prem and cloud-based storage solutions that have different levels of compatibility as a repository, compatibility with object lock with immutability, et cetera. And so one of the key design tenets that we have, and I alluded to this a couple of slides ago, I mentioned that data freedom is a big part of what we provide customers. That extends to not saying you've got to do a forklift upgrade if you want to be ransomware proof, right? We can usually meet our customers where they are and give them an easy solution that doesn't require a long hardware lead time and supply chain issues to get ransomware immutability.
Fantastic. Great. And Waverly, thanks for that question. Another question from Rob, which sounds like a follow-up conversation, but wondering if Veeam offers SLED or government pricing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Rob, we can have our account teams reach out to you. We have a couple of different distributors that work with us for public sector and a huge range of both state and local government and federal VARs that have Veeam pricing and that can register an opportunity and make sure that you get advantageous public sector pricing from us.
Jeff, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is you've been tracking this research for a few years, and if at a few different points you sort of alluded to sort of perceptions about federal and state and local government and how they think and act. And that some of that differs from the data. Are you finding that, everybody's behavior in the cloud is kind of converging on best practices, or, the same forces are acting on everybody, or there's still like a lot of really interesting wrinkles, on the government side?
The good news for public sector is that it is a much easier conversation when as a data protection vendor, when I try to help an organization do the right thing in terms of making sure that they keep custody of their data, that they're responsive to things like litigation or future legal action or legal action about a contract or procurement or whatever, public sector gets that. That's where public sector lives. That's where they've always lived. Long-term data retention, keeping custody of our own data for decades is just something that public sector understands in a way that private sector has not had to previously. So those conversations, it is really easy to talk with even a relatively small municipality, a county, a city, a town, and you say, look, you've got relevant data, Microsoft 365. If you get sued about why this bridge fell down, if you get sued about a purchase that happened 3 years ago, if you get sued because someone dies on a road and was it up to design specs or whatever, that's a conversation that every level of government totally understands, and they know we have to be able to respond to discovery. We have to be able to respond to litigation. So government is ahead in that, and it makes having adult conversations about that subject a lot easier. One
Hmm.
of the fun things that the data has shown, and I didn't call this out, but it's in the larger survey data, is that federal government specifically is a really strong player in the container and Kubernetes space. Um, there is kind of a legacy, and we've all read the headlines over the years of big waterfall designed improvement projects. You know, X agency is aiming to update its antiquated systems, which haven't been updated since the 1970s. I mean, you can apply that to a number of agencies. We've
Right.
read those headlines over the years. And we've also read the follow-up headline a year later, you know, system scrapped its DOA, you know, the government wasted billions on it, which unfortunately has happened.
Yeah.
One of the cool things that I've seen in federal government and DoD, and the stats play this out, fill this out, and show this is true, is that the adoption of containers is being seen as a real way to make sure that there are never headlines like this again, that we have a much more agile, constant innovation, constant development type way of rolling capabilities out. And that's even extended to things like uh, stunts, but really interesting stunts where, you know, some of the imaging and object tracking software on spy planes have been updated in flight to show how modular the systems are and the fact that they're capable of being updated without updating the hardware. And I think we're going to see more of that. Things like Platform One that the Air Force has rolled out, a secure uh, sec DevOps type framework that is being used by all service branches and is actually being used by some enterprise commercial customers, especially banks now, so that they can benefit from that same kind of secure development environment. That's an area where federal government is actually starting to lead in, and I find it really exciting to be part of that and being able to help with the process.
That's really exciting to hear about.
It's good news, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Um, well, Jeff, I think we're running up on time here, but you've gone through a lot of statistics, a lot of really valuable data. Anything you want people to to really take away from sort of this fire hose of information.
it's a lot. The one thing that I will comment on, and I just said that government organizations tend to be better about this than others, but it's still not bad to remind. You need to protect your data wherever it is. Remember, when we looked at the top three, at the top five causes of cloud outage, of outages that were most impactful, both for state and local, for Fed, and for educational organizations, cloud service outages were in the top five, stack ranked for all of these three types of orgs, for every type of government and for education. So protect your data in the cloud. Find a way to get it cross cloud or to get it out of the cloud, because you may be relying on it more than you know. And resiliency, that is uptime, is not the same as your data being backed up. So you really need to think about that and plan on it.
Okay. All right. Well, great closing thoughts there. Really appreciate it, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to have you on these sessions, and thanks so much for filling us in on all this great research that you guys are doing.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Scott.
All right, and I'll just leave that up there for a second. Again, you can register to attend that event virtually as well as in person. The QR code is there, and I'll go ahead and leave that up while we take care of our final piece of business for the day, which is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $250 Amazon gift card is Eldon Hamada from Nevada. So congratulations to Eldon. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I again want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes this event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.